the interest of time, let's go ahead and get started. I want to welcome you all today to the latest installment of the Enforme Collaborative. My name is Kevin Fitzpatrick, and I serve as President and CEO of Enforme Interactive. The collaborative was conceived as a clearinghouse of information of common cause amongst professional associations. And we've, over the last number of months, taken on a number of different topics, but I think that today's topic is particularly compelling. It's professional associations and the new normal. And we certainly are, I think, moving into a new arena. I've asked two experienced association professionals to join us today in a panel format. And let me please introduce them now. The first is Johnnie White. Johnnie is an association executive with over 30 years experience, CEO of the internationally prominent DC-based American Society of Appraisers. And prior to that position, he served on the leadership team of the American Academy of Otolaryngology. And prior to that, when I first met Johnnie, he was executive director of the Cardiovascular Research Foundation. So he brings a wealth of experience across many different disciplines to today's discussion on the new normal. And then also we are joined by John Forbes, and John serves as the principal for Balanced Growth Consulting, a Chicago-based consultancy serving healthcare, insurance, and financial services sectors. John is also executive director of the American Venous Forum. He has had C-level positions at the American Academy of Periodontology, as well as the American Academy of Pediatrics. And he has served as CEO of a blood services unit of the American Red Cross. So we're incredibly grateful for them sharing their expertise today and for taking time from their busy schedules to think aloud with us about the current era that we're in as professional associations and the path forward. And so I'm going to serve as moderator. I'll be asking each of our speakers some questions, soliciting their input. I would ask everyone who is in attendance to please mute your microphone during the initial part of the discussion. And as we have time later, we'll be opening up the floor for questions and comments. So thank you both, and without further ado, let me first turn to John Forbes and ask the question, John. The premise of this webinar is that associations are about to emerge into a new normal. Is that really true, or do you think we're just going to resume business as usual on the other end of this episode?
Yeah, that's a great question, Kevin. Associations have this stickiness, this history, this legacy, the tradition, but this pandemic is forcing innovation, is forcing us to think differently and evolve as organizations very, very quickly like we've never seen before. And the two main drivers that we're seeing right now is called virtual meetings and virtual work at home. And those are the two big new drivers that will impact our strategy, our operations, our people, our governance, and all kinds of things that we're doing in relation to technology as well. So the new normal has to be different, because if we try to go and live in the past, how we've governed, how we've managed, how we've led, I think we'll be lost in the dust, because we have to change and accept that social distancing will be around for a while, that we have to think about our meetings differently. We'll have to have hybrid meetings and where we have a virtual component and perhaps a face-to-face component. Governance is going to be different. So we're not going to have backroom voting by board members, because we won't be able to be together like it happened in the past. So things will be very, very different, and hopefully the innovation opportunity that we have right now will create this future that will bring value to members and bring value to our organizations.
Thank you, John. Johnnie, can I ask you the same question? Are we entering into or emerging into a new normal, or is it we just pick up where we left off?
Yeah, we're absolutely moving into a new normal. I think we've learned a lot through this process. And one of the things we learned is, we can operate at a high level virtually. This was a surprise to me. I initially thought, we would have issues working virtually. I have a staff of about almost 30 people. And I do have, I think most organizations have in place where you have a telecommute and your staff are working, 1 to 2 days out of the week, but no one knew that you would be telecommuting the entire time. And I was concerned with that too. But then when we put that in place, and we found that we were working at a high level and continuing to work at a high level, knew that, this is a new normal for us and it may change the future for us. As I'm looking at renewing my lease in another year, I'm honestly looking at different space structure, something much smaller than what we have today, because I may not necessarily need an office or a cubicle space for every employee. I can have them work from home. So for us, and running our organizations, as we all know, rent is a huge expense for us. So, this could provide some opportunities to cut some costs because we know we can now work from home. And then on the other side, as John talked about with virtual events, this has definitely changed the way that we are interacting with our members, with our attendees. And when talk about from a member standpoint, most associations have board meetings, and usually they're meeting, 2-3 times a year in person. So you're flying everybody into different destinations. We weren't able to do that. So we're all, using the technology today, Zoom or go to meetings or something like that, where they're talking to each other. It's changed the dynamic because as John stated, you don't have that additional networking opportunity where you have the board members sitting over there talking to each other and coming up with things. You don't see that because they can't do that on the screen. And you also notice when someone's not paying attention because you can see them on the screen and, you can kind of tell from their interactions on the screen if they are paying attention. So it's just definitely changed the way that we're operating as an organization, dealing with volunteers and developing programs for members.
Thanks, Johnny. I think the points both of you raise are spot on and profound. And speaking of profundity, what do you think have been the most profound adjustments that associations have had to make during the pandemic, and which of those do you think are really going to stick? And Johnny, I'll go back to you to ask you to take the first crack at this.
Yeah, I think it was the virtual events, and I say events, and I'm putting in this umbrella of all activities that we do, from a committee meeting to a board meeting to courses, and then also large annual meetings. Luckily my conference, our large conference is not until October, but I've had some smaller programs throughout where we had to put everything online. So that one right there, it shocked me that we were able to get that going, and we had participants, because if you look at 12 months ago and you told that attendee that we're going to have you come online and listen to the speakers and interact virtually, they would have said no way, because I need to be there, I need to get on a plane, I need to be at that hotel and so forth. But now that they're required or not required because of the situation we're in, and this is the only way that you're having access, it has changed their mindset on this. And then also, I think what has benefited us doing these programs virtually, we have actually expanded our audience. I know I've seen it, and I've seen some of my colleagues, where the audience is much more than what they would have had if they had in person, because now you have a global audience. Not that you didn't have that before, but you have a global audience that doesn't necessarily have to get on a plane and doesn't have to pay for all of those travel costs. Only cost that they have now is that registration fee. So it's provided an opportunity to expand the audiences when you talk about these virtual events.
Great, Johnny. Thank you for that. John, can I ask you to respond to that as well? What are the most profound adjustments that associations have had to make?
Yeah, I think the socialization aspect is very significant. I have a team that I work with of outstanding professionals and a business partner in a management services firm, and we were having these conference calls, and now we're having Zoom calls. So we moved from this lack of closeness to a greater closeness, but what we're lacking is that physical closeness. So I think that's a big adjustment. When the meeting is half virtual and half face-to-face or all virtual, that socialization aspect is important to understand. How do we build socialization? How do we build networking when we're not physically together? That's one of the solutions I think we need to think about. I think culture is another important thing. When we all have cultures, and different organizations have different sizes. So I'll give you a quick example. Pediatrics, $110 million business, 450 staff, 65,000 members, big organization, big facility. How do you take 450 people and get them to function when they were mostly in the office working together? How do they socialize? Periodontology, much, much smaller, 35 staff, 13 million budget, 8,000 members, staff all working at home. And they love being together because they work well together. They teamed up, they had lots of events. And that sort of joy part has been taken away from our environment right now. The current organization, American Venous Forum, we're a very small 700 member vascular surgery organization of specialists. And we have a virtual staff and a management firm working together. So size, I think, makes a difference. And culture based on that size makes a difference in how we function. So as leaders, I think we need to think about how do we create that environment and that culture of trust when we can't be together to show and demonstrate physically what we're able to do as leaders.
Yeah, that's a very important point. And Peggy McElgan, who sent in a message via the chat function, a question via the chat function, on exactly that topic. And she asks, how are you going to cultivate networking more purposefully, given the shortcomings associated with virtual events? And you began to address that, John. Johnny, can I ask you to speak to that networking and social aspect?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in terms of following up what John stated, we're all humans, and one of the things that we do well is, or one of the needs that we have is networking. We need to interact with each other, and so in this state that we're in, one of the things that I've asked my staff to do is, continue still having your meetings. Most of my group, they have the department meetings, but I also tell them, do it virtually, just as we're doing today, and have the cameras on. I mean, it's really good to see the individual rather than just talking on the phone. So continue doing that through technology and using the cameras and so forth to see each other. One of the things that I've been so busy and I haven't had the opportunity to do, but I am actually going to do this week, is just really reaching out to each of my employees. One of the things I used to do is take one of my staff members each week to lunch. Well, I can't do that now because, we're all in this situation, but that doesn't mean that I can't give them a call and just say, hey, how are you doing? How is it going? Because that's kind of what they're looking for from their leaders, that leadership skill and just knowing that you care. And by doing these additional things, such as calling, getting on the virtual and being able to see each other, really helps them from a socialization standpoint and just from personal wellness. Because, you can have some employees, unfortunately, when they're not getting that opportunity to network, they're going to start to not perform as well because they don't feel that they are getting all the things they need. And we don't need to go into some of the healthcare things there, but you have to continue to communicate and connect with the employees.
If I may, Kevin, I'd like to add to that, Johnny, great stuff there. But lunch and learns are still possible. Little wine tasting with your staff is still possible at the end of the day. And so I think as leaders, we need to think about how do we connect at a level of with our staff in a new way, in a different way that creates that commitment and creates the focus on mission as opposed to not being thought about, not being reached out to. I have a friend of mine who who's been working at home, and she hasn't not had any contact from her organization in 60 days. Can you imagine the irresponsibility of that organization by not making that person feel secure and safe and cared about? So as leaders, very important for us to reach out in new ways with our boards, with our committee chairs, with our staff, and let them know we care.
Yeah,
An excellent
absolutely.
point, and one that's reinforced and amplified by Cheryl Brannon on the chat feature. She talks about communication and transparency being key, and that empathy and wellness checks are important as well. And I think she's spot on. I think all the comments you've made are spot on. And you can't, during an interval like this, using the technologies that we are, I think perhaps the point is that you can't over communicate, but you certainly can under communicate to your teams.
Right. And also I'll point out two things. One is you still continue to do the routine things that you do when you talk about interacting with your staff. So for example, we do a all staff meeting, once a month, every other month, and we're still doing that. So you want to continue with that routine, and we're focusing on the staff, but that's also with the members. I've now been more frequent in my communication to the members just to give them an update on what's going on with the association. I do a CEO update every 2 weeks, and it talks about, how the organization is doing, what's happening with the staff, what are our plans for the future, and then also giving them information on what we know that's happening related to the COVID-19. So to give them tips and tricks to help them in their businesses. So you also have to continue, or even actually at this point, communicate more to the members so that they know that you're there for them.
So let's stick with the member side of this for a moment, if we could. And Sue O'Sullivan makes the comment about member value and member value creation during this interval and beyond, as we move to more virtual experiences. John Forbes, I'll ask you, going forward, will members have new expectations of their associations?
I think so. We have to be focused on our mission, but focused on our members. In our organization of vascular surgeons, their lives have changed. They are no longer doing elective surgeries because they can't. But what they are doing is supporting the other line staff in their hospitals with triaging in the intensive care unit, supporting vital sign development of patients entering the hospital. So their lives are different. One of our physicians wrote an article in our newsletter about fear. His normal course of work doesn't have him go into an intensive care unit with a dying person and having to put a line in a COVID patient. And there's a picture of him all masked up, looked like he's going to Mars, and he talked about fear. This is a physician who's doing surgical procedures every day of his life. Now, for the first time, wasn't trained to deal with this kind of situation. So I think we've got to be understanding of our members and where they live. A lot of them who aren't doing these elective procedures may be at home. Their practices have declined because they don't have the income from those procedures. So we have to be thoughtful about their roles and their lives, both professionally and personally. So our mindset has to change in terms of thinking about where they are and how they're living today. And life, the normal life of the association relationship to the member has changed. And how do we as leaders engage them in a new way by understanding where they are and where they're living in the moment?
So thank you, John. And so Johnnie, so you're more on the business side these days, right, of the equation. Your members are not taking the physical risk of a frontline provider as John's are. But you have a membership to serve. You have a global membership to serve. And from your perspective, what do you think that new set of expectations might include?
Yeah, I mean, so you're absolutely right. I mean, our members, we have 5,500 members worldwide. They are appraisers, and we have different classes of appraisers, from real estate appraisers to business valuation appraisers, gem and jewelry appraisers, and personal property appraisers, and so on. And each of these different classes of appraisers have different backgrounds. What I mean by that, we have a number of them that are small businesses, meaning they own their own business. And then we have some that work for the very large firms. So they have different needs and wants. And so as an association and supporting our members, the things that we did, and that's going to resonate with them, is becoming a resource for them, a source for them. and a organization that's advocating for them. So I give you an example, for a lot of our small business members, this was not a good time for them because they were not getting as much revenue, and they didn't have all the information related to what the government is doing with the PPP and the SBA. So we as an organization was advocating on their behalf to ensure that they were part of this story when it was time to the government start to give out this money. So we really focused a lot on supporting our members from an advocacy standpoint. And then the other side of that was supporting our members to provide facts. As this pandemic came out, there was so much information out there. Who's essential employees, who's not essential employees. For example, our real property appraisers, it was different state by state. So we just tried to get as much information as possible to provide them factual information so that they can navigate what they need to do within their state. So these are some of the things that we did, and we found that we needed to do as an organization that's supporting our members. And I think this is going to, as we start to get out of this and get into some normalcy here, they're going to go back and see that we were an organization that they could rely on during these terrible times.
So some of the questions we're getting from the audience deal with member value and dues and revenue opportunities going forward as we need to make adjustments. Johnnie, do you think we need to, as association executives, begin to discount membership? Do we need to be backing off on the costs, the prices we charge for attending meetings and educational events, professional events, or can we preserve some of that revenue, perhaps all of that revenue going forward by reshaping and recasting some of our offerings?
I mean, I think there's definitely opportunities to relook at your pricing models. But I will also say you do not want to discount your fees, because then what you're saying is the value of your education. Let's just use virtual events as an example. Your conferences. You don't want to discount it too much, because then you are watering down the value of that conference. And so my take on the fees for programs is I try to keep them the same as it was if it was in person, because if you think about it, it is the same content, it is the same speakers, the same program. But what you want to also do is promote the cost savings that they are receiving now. They do not have the travel costs. They do not have the hotel costs. They don't have to worry about going out and going to restaurants and so forth. So they're actually saving money. So that cost that they're paying a registration fee is, as we all know, is only a small component of all the costs associated with going to a program. So I would recommend, as you're looking at your pricing for your virtual events, I wouldn't necessarily go in and discount it right away. Change the story and talk about the benefits of, well, not necessarily a benefit, but the cost differences now that you have, where you don't have all those travel costs. And then on the other side, when you talk about member dues, again, I don't necessarily would say or recommend that you should, start cutting your dues. What you do is you put other programs in place. I give you an example. In this time, as a person is getting their member dues invoice, they're going to look at that and say, okay, do I pay that, or do I pay their mortgage, or something else that's essential to them? But if you put in place in front of them and say, hey, this is your dues invoice, you don't have to pay it all right now. You can pay in installments. Pay a little bit now, pay a little bit later, and so forth. And I think that would be a better story for them to hear, where they said, okay, I could pay a little bit and I can still be part of this organization, and I don't have to worry about my my membership expiring or being terminated, because now I have this plan where I can give a little bit now, and I know at some point when I'm better, I'm going to be able to pay the rest of this. So that's what I would look at in reference to as we look at our fees. Look at different ways of approaching it.
That's great, Johnnie. Thank you for that. John, your thoughts?
I'd love to add to that. Great start there, Johnnie. I see three words here: I see patience, I see flexibility, and I see value. So patience, if we're hounding our members to pay their lapse dues, that's sending the wrong message. We need to be a little more patient with that pursuit and how we communicate to those lapse members. They're not thinking about paying their dues. They're thinking about how they're going to survive in their homes and take care of kids and manage this current economic environment. So patience, flexibility. If the member comes to you and says, you know what, I've just lost some income and I've got some challenges here, would you mind if I have a little bit of flexibility? Let's be flexible. And about value, this COVID experience enables us to bring value to our members in new ways. For example, in our society, helping our members understand clinical practice opportunities when a patient is presenting with COVID who has a thrombolytic experience, giving them the information to deal with this situation, bringing them the literature and the science to help them make informed decisions. So in the medical field, China was the precursor, and there are a lot of articles coming out of China about what they've done to treat these kinds of patients. Sharing that quickly and in a timely fashion with our members creates that value. And so by pivoting on value, I think that's a very, very important thing that we should be thinking about as leaders, is what do the members need in today's environment that could be of value to them? Then they go, wow, my society took care of me. They didn't hound me for dues. They gave me value. They helped me manage my patients and my practice and my services. And what a great place to stay a part of in the future.
Great comments. Thank you for that, John. So we're coming up on 30 minutes, and we try to keep these webinars around 40 minutes because we know everyone's very, very busy. I would ask anyone who has questions to use the chat feature and ask those at this time. We've had some great comments that have been coming in as the discussion has gone forward. I want to begin to wind up our webinar with some optimism about the future. On an optimistic note, what we're seeing as a service provider is that associations are being able now to expand the attendees, the types of attendees, to Johnny's point earlier, that can attend these virtual meetings. And we're also seeing that their margins are increasing because they have been able to avoid a lot of the infrastructure costs associated with that physical event while maintaining the dues structure and the registration structure that they've had traditionally. So from that sort of business perspective, I think there's cause for optimism as we innovate our way forward in terms of these service offerings. John, let me ask you, broadly speaking, as the association community looks back on the pandemic, and so now I'm time traveling to a point where we're out of this morass to a certain extent. As we look back on this, what do you think the association community can be most proud of?
Boy, I use the term mission, Kevin. I go, this is shone a light for me on why we exist as an organization, what is our purpose. And as leaders, if we can highlight our mission and serve our members based on that mission, we're going to be better off. And I'm seeing societies and associations doing that. I go, wow, this is why we exist. We exist to serve our members. We exist to educate the public. We exist to create value for our organization and our members we serve. And I think that has really been an important, mindset for myself and others that I've talked to. And so I just think that, re-energizing that mission focus is important. A couple other things that we need to think about is the strategy. We all have strategic plans. And where are we now with transitioning to a new normal if we're living in a strategic plan that was constructed a year ago? And also the budgeting process. We all have budgets, right? What do we do when the meeting got canceled with our budget? So forecasting is something that we have to be much, much better at and create that glide path into the future with data that will inform decisions, as opposed to saying, we're going to stick with that budget, we're going to stick with that strategy, and in 6 months we're out of business because we didn't pivot and didn't innovate during this point in time.
Great points. And I'm seeing messages come in on the chat feature that talks about community building, talks about resiliency, talks about envisioning new opportunities, all very much part of that, I think the spirit of the professional association space that will help carry us forward. Johnnie, what do you think we're going to be most able to be proud of as we look back on our transition to this new normal?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with what John said. And one thing, you brought up budgets, and I want to tip here. We're actually going through the development of our budget because our cycle, July 1 through June 30. And as I talked to our CFO, we sat down and talked, and normally we're all looking at putting a 12-month budget together, but there's such unknowns right now. So we are actually just putting together a 90-day and 180-day, and it's a cash forecast. Because right now, cash is king, and we need to ensure that we have enough cash to pay all of our bills and so forth. So I just want to put that tip out there. As you are starting to look at your budgets, it's not, in my mind, a long-term budget. You're looking at a short-term budget because there's a lot of unknowns. So you want to see how you look for, the first 3 months, and then see what it looks like for the next 6 months. And then in terms of what I found was profound was the collaboration. One of the things that we did early on when this started to happen is reached out to, at one point I would call our competition, but now I would call our partners. Because within our organization or within our membership, there's so many different competitors for each of the different classes of members that we have. And we all came together as one group to become a resource, and we're all speaking the same language. We put together webinars together, we sponsored webinars, we all had our own speakers on there, and it really showed how we can work together when there's a need for us to speak with one voice and be able to support the entire profession rather than our individual memberships for each organization. So I think that's probably the biggest thing that I found that went very, very well, is how we were all able to come together as one, because we all knew, in order for us to get through this, we're going to have to be together instead of trying to fight each other. So that really, I thought, was really great.
That's an incredibly important point. Sue Sullivan amplifies that, saying that community building is essential. And it reinforces the point you just made about perhaps new alliances now forming or being reinforced in ways that weren't previously possible. Great.
Absolutely.
Well, as we're awaiting perhaps any additional questions or one additional question or comment, any final thoughts, John, from your perspective before we close out the webinar?
One of my friends who's a CEO a couple of weeks ago said, we've transformed our society into a public relations firm, communicating in real terms effectively every day. So when you think about how we need to lead in the future, we do have to be better at communicating value and benefit to our members. So becoming that communicating organization is a big part of our future.
Great point. Johnnie?
I will say that, we're all in this together, from a staff standpoint, from a member standpoint, from a profession standpoint. We're all in this together. And I think that's the best way for us to get out of this, is we're working together to ensure that everyone is taken care of. A couple of other things that we ended up doing is, we started some fundraisers, for individuals that are affected by COVID, for our members. So we're really trying to support the members in the entire profession as much as possible. And then on a personal note, the one big profound thing that I learned is I didn't know that I can grow a beard. So I've been quarantined or in this house for 10 weeks now, and I decided not to shave until the pandemic is over. And interesting enough, I didn't know I looked like Santa Claus with the white hair. So I thought I'd just point that out.
We're all learning new things about ourselves in this.
Yes, we are.
Well, I want to thank our speakers today, Johnnie White and John Forbes, for their insights, their generosity with their knowledge, and drawn from long and varied careers, successful careers in this space. So thank you, gentlemen, both of you. I also want to thank the attendees and some wonderful questions and comments that came in the chat feature, as we've certainly, I think with this topic, tapped into something important that we're all trying to think our way through, innovate our way through. But I think the comments about resiliency, the comments about community, the comments about the importance of the services that we offer to our members will resonate beyond today's webinar. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another webinar. It'll be from the perspective of the CIO and the new technologies and the use of technologies that will be required as we enter into this new normal. And until then, I want to thank you both again, and we'll talk to everyone soon. So,
Perfect.
Have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kevin. Thanks, John.
Yeah, bye-bye. Bye, John.
Bye-bye.